science and society. And this time we're looking at the arts and humanities. We're just so very fortunate that we can call upon prominent people in our community and their collections and find such interesting speakers as you will see we have tonight. David is probably well known to very many of you, but maybe you don't know all parts of his life. That is the challenge that we have given to Mandy. Thank you, Mandy, our vicar Mandy Flaherty, who has only known David for half a year?
About 8 months. Yeah.
About 8 months. So even less than most of you. So she's been enjoying herself, finding out. David, we're so grateful to you for being prepared to be in the spotlight tonight. Thank you very, very much indeed. We're calling this An Unexpected Life, and the whole series is called Inspiring Lives. And you'll find that all 4 of our speakers have lived very interesting lives in the arts and are generously prepared to share them with us. But David chose an unexpected life, and I don't know what to expect. And we're very, very grateful. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Margaret. And David, welcome to this first event of our In Conversation Series 2024. It's lovely to have you, and before I came and met you, I did actually hear lots about the Queen's Head pub in particular, and David, you as Publican. I think that's probably how many of us do know you. But I'd like to start by asking you, you decided to title this conversation An Unexpected Life. So I'd just like to ask you why you decided on that title and why that was applicable to your life.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. This is an honour, and which I'm very aware of. Yes, well, my whole life has been full of unexpected events. To begin with, my birth. I don't mean my mother didn't know I was coming, but the timing was wrong. I was born in 1938, 24th of March to be exact, and at 4 o'clock in the morning. And my mother was in a nursing home preparing to have me, and she thought she was going to have me, and rang the bell, and the matron came and said that, no, got it all wrong, I wasn't due for another 24 hours at the least, and she'd go back to sleep and all be well. Well, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I arrived with no one there except my mother. And to be worse than that, my umbilical cord was twice around my neck and I was blue. So my mother rang the bell, of course, when things started happening, and the matron eventually came in very agitated and did all the necessary things and saved my life, really. So that was the first unexpected thing. I shouldn't really be here, but I am. I'm a survivor. And then it went on from there, really. I was brought up in Cheshire, on the Wirral, which is a lovely part of Cheshire, between the Dee and the Mersey. In those days, very rural, and my mother was one of 8 children, and her mother, my grandmother, was the centre of the whole family. I was brought up with my cousins. My dear sister, who is here, I see, hadn't arrived for 7 years. I was an only child for 7 years. But anyway, I was brought up in the midst of all my cousins, my aunts and uncles, and they all lived within 4 miles of my grandmother, who was a kingpin. So life was fun, great fun. I had a privileged life, in no more ways than one. And my cousins and I, we played together. Every day there'd be something going on. And I was used to mingling with people and going to teas and parties and things like that. Of course, the war came 1.5 years after I was born, but it didn't really impede. I knew it was on vaguely when I was about 3 and 4. I knew that something was happening, and the adults were all talking in whispers about it in front of the children. But I knew something, big was happening, a big event. And I remember seeing Liverpool burning. My father took me up, we were staying in Birkenhead. And he took me up to see the church I'd been christened in, burning, St. Nicholas, the parish church in Liverpool, where I was christened. And so I can remember, it's difficult, when you're young, I was about 4, I suppose, and you witness these things, you don't know whether you actually remember seeing it or whether you remember being told you saw it. That's the problem. But whatever it was, it's quite firm in my mind, seeing the flames coming out of the tower of St. Nicholas. So yes, that's...
Okay, so that's a very vivid description of your early childhood, of lots of people, but also a very interesting and traumatic part of our history as well. So fast forward a few years then, if you could tell us something about your first experiences of work and what kind of work you went into, or something about your father and his work and how that related to what it was that you did.
Yes. You see, the next unexpected thing in my life is I was very happy on the Wirral. It's a lovely place to live. I'm in the bosom of the family. It was wonderful. And I knew no other life. And then suddenly, the unexpected happened. My father was transferred to Whitehall in London. He worked for the Civil Service, Ministry of Food, and was suddenly kicked out to London, to Whitehall. And of course, the family, we had to move, and there were no houses available, so we went to live with my grandmother, my father's mother, in Edgeworth, which is North London. And so I got to know my father's side of the family. There were lots of kind of great aunts dotted around, rather formal ladies, but great fun. And so it was entirely different life.
Sorry, I was going to say, you seem to be painting a picture of having a lot of ladies in your life who've been very influential in your life as well. So is that part of the picture of how things have been? So obviously there'd be very strong...
very influential lady.
I wonder who that could be.
And that was another unexpected item.
Well, we'll get to that in due course, yes.
So anyway, then I found myself uprooted from my school in Birkenhead. I was lucky, I've always been privately educated, so I went to another prep school in Mill Hill. So uprooted from all my friends and my cousins, who I loved dearly, and my aunts and uncles, and my darling grandmother up there, to another grandmother who doted on me because I was the only male heir of the Shorts. And so she'd had 3 sons, and one killed in the First World War, one died shortly after being born, and my father, who survived. And so I was his son, and she just doted on me. I could do no wrong. I was spoiled rotten by her, but she was lovely. So it was a very different childhood then, because I went to this school, I knew nobody, but it was a lovely school. I was very happy there, and we were allowed to run riot at lunchtime. After lunch we went down, played we had a lake and grounds and climbed trees and all that kind of thing. So it was a free life, a very free life. But of course the people in the south aren't as friendly as the people in the north. So I had to get used to that. I would talk to anyone, but I soon learned you didn't do that. It's a different culture completely. But that's life.
And so obviously you had these 2 experiences of moving from one part of the country to another, and so what kind of work did you go into once you left school, and
yes,
how did that...
School, again, my school, the main school, I went on to Mill Hill, and at Mill Hill I started off okay, and then for some reason they put me into the physics and chemistry. 2 subjects I loathe, actually. I can't tell you. I don't understand, that's why I loathe them. And they were taught, but they never got through to me at all. It was all to do with iron filings and things like that. And I never get my head around electricity, for example. I never do understand that. So it was different. And then from there, when they saw I wasn't really flourishing under the sciences, they put me into Greek and Latin. When really, I mean, Latin was okay. I got on with Latin reasonably well. Greek was all Greek to me. And so I then found myself doing what I really wanted to do, and that was music and art and history and geography. Because I'm a collector. I collected stamps, coins, all kinds of things you can mention that other people wouldn't even look at, much to my wife's disgust. Our loft is sagging under the weight up there. So they're the kind of things I wanted. And through stamps you learn about geography, you learn about history and politics and, you know, different leaders from the country. So it was very, very, I was interested in all that. So yes, it was a different type of life, really. But I merged and didn't know what to do, and somebody suggested, a school friend's father was an accountant and offered me work as an article clerk, an accountant firm in the city. Well, actually, it was on Court Road, but a lot of our audits were in the city, on the east end of London and south London and things. So I did all that, and I really thought it was very tedious. I do apologise to any accountants, but it was a very tedious life, and I thought life was more to offer than this. And what I did like about the job was meeting the people, of course. I went to different audits, everything from a one-man business in the east end of London, a tea, selling tea shop, to international oil companies and shipping firms. So I had a full range of people to meet, but the work was just so deadly boring.
So you clearly are a people person. You talked about that from all through your young life and into your early working life as well. I mean, are there any people that you remember from that era that stick in your mind, or any encounters of any people that stick in your mind, or anything?
Well, I'll tell you the story about my great Aunt May. There are many people I remember, but my great Aunt May was my grandmother's sister, and she had two daughters, Myrtle and Hazel. Lovely names, aren't they? And so Myrtle was an amazing woman. She worked for UNRWA and was out in Beirut. And Hazel was blind from birth, but her mother brought her up to be sighted. She said, you must do everything you can as if you're sighted. So she did exhibition diving and things like that.
Wow.
And Myrtle she was part of Cochrane's Young Ladies. I don't know if you've heard of them. He was an impresario and had a troupe of young ladies, all very proper, I must say. Because my Aunt May went with her everywhere, make sure no hanky-panky. And so, and Myrtle did this famous dance of the pearl coming out of an oyster shell. And she was a pearl that kind of evolved from this oyster shell. So she was quite an exotic lady in my life. Now, Aunt May, I got invited through Myrtle to the Olympic Games opening ceremony in 1948 at Wembley. And we were sitting in a box opposite the Royal Box. I mean, she was Lord somebody's secretary who was organising the games, and she had a big input. So we sat there, and afterwards there was a rather grand dinner at my Aunt May's flats in Battersea. And so we went there, my first kind of experience of a grand dinner party. There must have been about 26 people around her table. And we had all the courses and everything, and I survived all that. And then after the dessert, the cigarettes came out in a big silver cigarette case. And it passed round, you see, and I passed it on. And I heard this stentorian voice at the head of the table, my Aunt May, saying, "David, you haven't taken a cigarette." So I piped up, "I don't smoke, Aunt May." "Rubbish," she said. "All boys of your age smoke. Take one." So I took one, of course. Yeah. I have to say it wasn't my first, but that's beside the point. I did take one and lit it, and of course I couldn't stand it. I choked and coughed and spluttered. It was a nightmare for me. And that was the end of that. Put me off forever. that's it. Never smoked since. So it can be a good deed, really.
Lovely.
But that's one of the characters. She was a great
Yes.
character on me.
Yes, and in amongst many others as well. And so this life, we're going to move forward a little bit now. I think if my timing serves me correctly, but fast forward a little bit after your accountancy experience and the people that you met and all the companies that you worked for and everything, you were involved with a livery company at some later date
Yes, that
in
came
London.
just a little later. The pub came first.
Yes. Ah, the pub came first.
Yes.
Okay, let's fast forward to the pub then, because
Yes, well,
I think that's the bit.
After my father retired in 1962, no, 1960, he was 60 then, and he retired from the civil service, and being an active man, didn't want to just waste his life doing nothing. So he, after many vicissitudes, someone suggested he bought a pub. Now I have to say, our family hardly touched alcohol. They weren't TT, but and going to a pub was about a height of simpleness, I have to say. So it all came to head one Sunday when a school friend and I decided to have a drink. We've been to church, by the way.
That makes all the difference.
Makes all the difference. And for my father, although I was a day boy at boarding school, he'd always insisted that I should do exactly what the boarders do and had to go to church every Sunday, which was a delight, you understand.
Of course.
And not read newspapers or anything like that. I had to be completely at the border was. So when I started work, this kind of routine followed on. And as for drinks, only once at Christmas time, when my father would take me up to the city, to a wine merchant he knew, and we'd order a dozen bottles of various cherries and ports and things for Christmas. And once that had gone, that had gone. And there was no more drink for the rest of the year in our house. We were virtually TT. So for my father to think about buying a pub, it hit me with a sledgehammer. And we went to this pub with a school friend on a Sunday, after church, as I say, and I was late for lunch, and came home, and my father said, "You're late." I said, "Yes, I know, I've just been to the Leather Bottle with Stuart, I think it was, for a drink." "What? What? On a Sunday? To a pub?" Oh, I said, "Yes." He said, "Look, it's outrageous. There's no lunch for you. That's the end of that. Go to your room and don't come down till this evening." Oh, well. So for him to suddenly say he was buying a pub was completely out of character. However, when you buy a pub, we went to this, they're the broker who deals with pubs, like anything else, like an estate agent. And we went round various pubs all around the south of the country, Essex and, well, Kent, Sussex and Surrey mostly, and nothing suited us. So we went back to the agent and he said, "I've only got one other one." He said, "And that's, you won't even look at it." He said, "It's out near Cambridge." Now, in those days, Cambridge was the end of the world, I have to say. It was dank, dark, in the fen, you know, no one went to Cambridge unless you were at university. It was awful. You want to read Byron for that. He'll tell you how awful Cambridge was. He only lasted 3 months. So we said, "Oh, God." Sorry, I shouldn't say that, should I? Anyway, some expletive came out, and but we went to see it. And it turned out to be the one at Newton. And loved it. And loved it. My father really enjoyed it and said, this is the place, this is the place. So my mother suggested we went down to the church to have a look at the church to see what the village was like. You can always get a good idea what a village is like by going into the church. So we went down to the church, St. Margaret's, you see, and looked around, and then my mother suddenly shouted, "Harry, look at this. Look over the altar." And there over the altar are 2 windows, stained glass windows, dedicated to somebody called Hurrell, Hurrell, my mother's maiden name. So she said, this is a sign. This is a sign. We'll be happy here. So my father, not one being to ignore my mother, said, yes, well, we'll go and see if there's a hovel in the village. So we went back to the pub and asked the landlord, is there a hovel living in the village? Well, he was a bit of an ignoramus, that man. He said, no, he said, there's only a Mr. Harold living in the manor. So that was good enough for my father. We went down to the manor, knocked on the door, and Mr. Harold came to the door, welcomed us in, sat us down, gave us tea, and Mrs. Harold was there, and they were thrilled that we were thinking of buying a pub. There was only one problem. The council were thinking of buying it and demolishing it to improve the corner. The corner's dangerous. Well, it's not the corner that's dangerous, it's people driving it. So anyway, that's what happened. And my father said, and the council were going to have a meeting in 3 weeks' time to buy it. And then they would demolish it. So there was an urgency about it. So my father went back and told the estate agent we'd buy it. And he told his solicitor he wanted to buy it within a week. And the solicitor said, you're behaving outrageously, Mr. Short. You haven't had it surveyed yet. He said, there's no need for a survey. He said, it stood for 400 years. Why should it suddenly fall down now? And that was it.
Wow. Wow, that's quite a story. So, I mean, as obviously as in my profession, you know, we look for signs that God has intervened in lots of ways. It actually seems that lots of signs were laid up together in order for that to happen for you, not least the Horrell connection.
Yes.
Could you just explain that connection with Newton for any that might not be aware of
Well,
that?
it turns out Mr. Horrell, the Horrell family have been in Newton for about 400 years. And they're still there. You know, he's the squire of the village, really. And when my father mentioned that the council were thinking of buying the place and putting it down, Reggie Horrell said, well, we needn't worry about that. My father said, why not? He said, well, my brother is Lord Lieutenant. So that was the end of that. So the ball fell in the right order, you know?
Yes, definitely. And so you ended up in this part of the world, in Newton. Yes. Father as the landlord first, yes. And then when did you inherit the pub?
Well, yes, I came with him in 1962. I couldn't wait to give up accountancy, so I did. And we opened the pub. When you take over a pub, it happens at midday. You agree a time with the outgoing landlord and his the people he's got there supporting him, his valuer and all those people. The brewery was selling it to us, it's a free house. So he was tied. Anyway, we agreed all the price of the furniture and all the stock. It came, if I remember correctly, to about £59.13 or something. I mean, not an earth-shattering amount even in those days. And you had to pay by cash. Everything had to be done by cash. And then we had our stock. We had a brewery arrive with our stock that was going to be in. And we had to take advice from the old landlord as to what was likely we needed. So we did. And that had to be paid by cash. Everything was cash. And then at midday, the outgoing landlord came through the bar, lifted the flap up, and said, and handed the keys over and said, it's all yours now. So, of course, I've never been behind a bar. My father never been behind my bar. And so we found ourselves behind the bar. And the place was full of landlords who were expecting their free drink. Because that was the custom in those days. If you change over, all the landlords would go to the pub who were changing the landlord, and they'd get a free drink from the outgoing landlord, and a free drink from the incoming landlord. So it was a pretty good job for them. So, and of course, everything was different. I mean, the barrels are behind the bar. They still are behind the bar. They're very old-fashioned. And they have a tap in. Now, household taps, you turn around like that, don't you? Round and round and round. You know, the more you turn, the more water comes out. With a bar tap, it's just one turn, and then turn back again. It sounds simple, but when you're used to a household tap, I was twiddling the thing round, and beer was going all over the floor. I mean, the place was swimming in beer, and all his arms stretched. Luckily, they were so bitter and mild in those days. There's nothing else they wanted. So it was a very easy job. But even so, at 3 o'clock or 2:30 when we closed, we both were exhausted.
Yes, I'm not surprised. And so starts at the 42 or more years of you being involved with the Queen's Head pub. But I wonder if I could just ask you to elaborate a little bit on family life and how that all transpired here in Newton as well. And we haven't brought Juliet into the story yet, but I don't know if you can elaborate on how that
the other
all
unexpected
transpired.
thing was that my darling wife said yes when I asked. Not the first time. I was refused the first time. We'd been together for about 4 years. It was love at first sight with me. We met at a party with a mutual friend, and we met on the doorstep outside. We arrived at the same time and exchanged a few words, and then went up to the room where the party was, and the uncle was giving a speech, a terrible speech with the most corny jokes, and I thought, you have to laugh at them. So I did laugh, to give him support really, and then I heard this earthy laugh beside me, and looked down into these eyes, and thought at that moment, that is going to be my wife. So I couldn't wait to kind of get into conversation with her, so I went to the uncle finished then and said the buffet bar is open, go and help yourself to the food. So I went over and grabbed the first plate of what came to me, which was strawberry tarts. Well, it's not the kind of thing you start with. So I said, would you like a strawberry tart? And that was it. So, and I can verify that because we spent the night in the garden talking together. And then I drove her back to Guy's Hospital where she was a nurse. And we went on from there. I came back at about 4 o'clock in the morning and walking past my sister's bedroom, I either woke her up or she was still awake. And you can verify this, Sarah, can't you? She's over there somewhere. And so, she said, was the party good? I said, yes, I've just met my future wife. She said, you're drunk. I said, I'm not drunk at all. And that was it. So, yes.
And so did Juliet come up with you to Newton when you got
next
the
weekend she came up and stayed, and you had a funny feeling, didn't you, walking down Town Street? She thought this street is going to play a big part in my life. Extraordinary. And it was 4 years before we got married. As I say, I went up first. Julie, we'd been out together, and I don't know what happened, but it was a pub was the big barrier. It's not easy marrying a publican, I can tell you, because the pub is a very demanding master. And you have to be fit physically to lift all the barrels up and mentally to deal with all the people. Because they're always pouring out, well, you know all this, pouring out their problems to you. I used to refer them to the vicar.
But you didn't have a vicar at that time, though, did you? At that time?
No, the vicar just gone, we were an interregnum. But anyway, there we are. So, yes, without my wife to be there, I mean, you couldn't do it really. Because, and then the children came along, 2 boys, and, it takes a lot of my time. I was working every hour God gave, because we opened at 10 in those days in the morning, so it means you were busy from 8:30, cleaning the bars, getting the beer ready, bringing it, stocking up, all that kind of thing. And then that went on, you closed then at 2:30, and then opened again at 6 to 10 in those days, the early, it was 10 o'clock. But all this time, before you could afford staff, you had to be on duty yourself. So it was hard work, and I think it put a lot on my wife as well. So, but we're a team,
And with teamwork comes relationships with the people that you are serving and that are in the community. So I've heard a number of these stories as well, but how did you fit into community life? What was the kind of the more unexpected things that you got involved with as being the publican of the pub?
Yes.
You mentioned people came and poured their heart out, and you got involved in some emotional scenes and everything, but what other things did you...
There is one word for that, death.
Yes.
You see, death, in those days, people died in the village, not in hospital. They died in their homes. Much nicer, really. And so, we had, in the village, there were a lot of people living on their own, widowers. And so what happened was the milkman would come to me, or the postman, and say, because I was always there. I was always there in the pub. They always knew I was there. And they'd say, David, Mrs. Todd hasn't taken her milk in for the second day. Is she all right? So I said, better go over. Now, Mrs. Todd lived across the road from the pub. She was a Welsh lady, and her time was spent mostly standing at her garden gate looking at the traffic going by. A fascinating occupation, really. Not so much in those days. So I went over, and sure enough, there were 2 pints of milk on the doorstep. And so I knocked on the door and looked through windows and everything. And no one was there, so I went back and phoned the police. And the policeman came out, and those are the days when you could actually contact the police. You know, they were there. And they came out, and a young constable came out. And the first thing he did is put his foot straight through the door and smashed the door open. And we went in, and there, on the left-hand side was a sitting room with a bed in it, and Mrs. Todd lay there dead. So he said, now watch me closely. So I said, okay. And he put his hand under the bed like this, rummaging under the mattress. So I said, what are you doing? He said, looking for the money. I said, what money? He said, there's always money, in cases like this, there's always money under the mattress. And as he spoke, he brought out a leather satchel with over £500 in it. A huge amount of money in 1963 or whatever it was. So I said, good gracious. Now I said, you've got to watch me, count it, and then sign for it, and I'll take it back to the station with me for safety. So I did, and then we got the ambulance and the doctors and all that kind of thing, and took Mrs. Todd away. The next morning was a Sunday, and at about 10 o'clock, the door was thrust open, and this man came in. I'd never seen him before in my life. And he said to me, where is it? I said, where's what? He said, the money. I said, what money? He said, the money of my mother, Mrs. Todd. Where's it gone? Well, I said, the police have taken it. I'm sorry about your mother. We couldn't care less about that. He just wanted the money. He was a loathsome creature. He lived in Western Supermare. I'm not saying all people know. And so he was furious with me for letting it go. I said, listen, it's nothing to do with me. The police have it in the police station. And that was that. So death played a big part, actually, funny enough, in the early days in the pub.
Yeah.
People were dying regularly.
And I guess, as you were someone to call on.
Yes, always.
If the vicar wasn't available, and if you were interregnum, like you said, then you were someone to call on because you were there.
Yes. So
you must have been a port of call in some respects.
It was.
In the village,
it was.
Yeah. The pub was a location.
People would come to me to sign documents, and read documents to them. Some people couldn't write. It's a very feudal village in those days. Very feudal. And so that was a learning curve.
Now I want to ask you a little bit about, the thing that I knew about Queen's Head, the Queen's Head pub, before I came here, and that was to do with the famous brown soup.
Well,
because that's the one thing I knew about it, and it's famous, spread far and wide to the reaches of Huntingdon before I came here. So can you tell us about the origins of the brown soup?
Yes, I can actually, and it happened one day. Like everything else, an unexpected event, you know. What happened, I was had to go to the dentist or something after the session was finished at midday, at 3 o'clock, until 2:30. So my mother came through, I was open with a bowl of soup she made for me, and a hunk of bread and butter. And so we had one customer in at that time, a Mr. Doggett, and he always came in and was kind of driving a little ratty sports car. And so he sat at the bar, and I said, now Mr. Doggett, do you mind if I eat my soup, because I have to go out? He said, no. And then he said, ooh, smells good. He said, if I could get one of those every day, I would come in every day. I have to say, he did come in every day, soup or not. So, so I said to my mother, I went through and said to my mother, can you bring out another bowl of soup and a hunk of bread for Mr. Doggett? So I said, here, Mr. Doggett. Oh, so how kind of you. So he ate his bowl of soup. Well, 4 weeks later, I could see this was going to be a cellar. Now, you must realise at that time, no pub sold food. Now, every pub, mostly they're restaurants, really, rather than pubs. We're still a pub, but you can eat in it. Whereas in those days, a pub was a place you drank, you may get a packet of crisps if you're lucky, a winkle or one of those whelks or something you picked up with a pin from the bottle, or a Scotch egg or something like that. But that's all. No food as we know it. So, within 4 weeks of me serving that one soup to Mr. Doggett, we were selling 40 a day. The word went round like magic. We had all Fisons over in Harston used to come, queuing up to get in for their soup. So my mother had a huge job on her hand. And so did Juliet when she arrived. She made soup for 40 years. So that was the first job of the day, cutting up the vegetables. It's all homemade. And so that's how it started. Then, of course, people said, what is the soup today? So, oh dear, we thought of various things. And then, of course, the Trade Descriptions Act came in. You can't call a thing something if it's not this, that and the other. So I had the idea of the capital of Europe. So it was Madrid soup. It had onions in it, you know, Spanish onions. So things like that. So we went round and exhausted the capital of Europe. And then Robert, when Robert arrived, he had the idea of having the soup chart, like a paint chart, with the kind of colours down, explaining nothing really. You know, light brown soup is lighter than brown soup, things like that. So that's how it came about for it.
Yes, very ingenious in that respect. And you stuck to that principle really from 40 odd years ago,
yes.
that's not become a bistro pub at all.
No.
So what can I ask you, what in your view is the charm of the Queen's Head Newton? What's it got that's special, that's perhaps a little bit different or a bit unique from
other?
Fossilised.
I mean, I'm not a great one for changing things. If it works, fine. And so when I found that we seemed to be doing what people wanted, why bother changing it? And people they like to understand that when they go in a place, it hasn't changed much. They don't want new furniture. I used to get my furniture from the bonfire on the green, right all the time. You know, people threw out Victorian chairs and things like that. So I used to scout round there and bring the ones that from the pub that wanted burning and bring an old one back in its place. And that worked very well, the kind of exchange of mart green. We had one occasion when somebody put a bunch of raspberry canes. They only lasted a second before somebody said, oh, can I take the raspberry canes? I said, yes, but you must put something back. And so they put a chair back, and I took the chair. So I had to put something back. So it went on like that. So it's continuity is the word. Continuity.
Yeah, good.
And of course I knew everyone in the village, because I'd been there so long. I knew the fathers, the grandfathers, I knew the whole family.
Yeah, and that's that sense of steadfastness as well, isn't there?
Yes.
Going through the generations. Okay, so and though, of course, although the pub was a very consuming part of your life and remains so, you and Juliet also were involved in the Arts Fund, or have been involved in the Arts Fund, haven't you? So, as we are celebrating the arts with this series of conversations, I wonder if you could tell us something about that, how you got involved and what that entails.
Well, that happened again unexpected. No, my life been unexpected. We were members of the art. It's called the National, what's it called?
National Art Collection
Fund. That's right, the National Art Collection Fund, founded about 1903 by some very wealthy, worthy people to buy works of art for the nation which would otherwise go abroad. A noble aim. And the Rokeby Venus was the first painting they bought. And there was an organisation, a branch in each county. It was county run, and ours was led by a lady who lived near Wimpole. And we went to various events and loved them. So we went to one event in her house, and she asked us for lunch or something. She came up to me and said, David, I can't do it much longer. I'm going to move up to Scotland. Would you and Judith like to take over the organisation of this organisation? And she said, Judith's quite agreeable to this. And at the same time, I didn't know, so I said, well, if Judith's agreeable, yes, of course. Thinking to myself, oh, well. So then, she went to Judith and said the same thing. Judith, David's quite agreeable to this. And of course, next minute we knew we were leaving the house with a carton full of the books, with all the accounts and everything, and we were the representatives. And that's how that started. And then we had to run it. Well, Julie was the brain behind the thing, I have to say. I was just a kind of fodder. I used to do all the work, preparing the... We used to take people around country houses which weren't open to the public and provide them with lunch and things like that to make it interesting. We do 2 visits a day, one in the morning, then have lunch, and then in the afternoon do another one. And of course you get to see the most wonderful paintings and wonderful furniture and things like that in private houses that aren't open to the public, amongst other things, didn't we? Got that right.
And this was all to raise money for the foundation?
Yes, we raised money for the central organisation, and with that they put towards
preserving the arts in this country. Yeah. Again, very people-orientated piece of work that you're doing. All through your life, you seem to have had that thread of engaging with people, the ups and the downs, and the wonderful and the grim, all at the same.
I've always found people interesting.
Yeah.
And you can learn. If you're wise, you learn a lot.
Yes. And I was going to ask you, who have you got any people that you could just name, apart from your Aunt Maud, which you just talked about, who've taught you a significant thing, a significant lesson that...
I have to say my wife.
Yes.
No, really, we're a team.
Yes, yeah.
And without her, I mean, I'd be a shadow of myself. So it's been a happy marriage, very happy marriage.
And and one that's obviously, you both are outwardly focused as well in terms of other people.
Julie's not. Julie's more shyer than I am. And she restrains me from my exuberance, and I cheer her up in her shyness.
So, well, like you say, a proper team, hasn't it? So, what helps you then, in terms of, like, you said Juliet as well, but in terms of your kind of ethereal life, what has kind of motivated you or helped you through your life that has, I mean, you say it's been very unexpected, but how have you dealt with those unexpected things? Some people faced with difficulties like that, like having to pour drinks for everybody in the pub and not being able to turn the tap off, would have run from it or frozen or whatever. So what is it that helps you to have dealt with those things?
Well, I think you've just got to grit your teeth and get on with it, actually. I was always brought up to believe that you should seize an opportunity and do it, and not run to somebody else, always moaning. And so I tried to do that, not always successful. But again, if you have someone with you who thinks the same as you do, that helps no end and gives you strength to do that.
And I think that's probably a good note for us to end this formal part on tonight. And David, I'm sure there are going to be plenty of questions, but you've taken us through a fascinating journey so far of some highlights in your life, not all finished by any means. We haven't had a chance to talk about everything, but they may come out in some of the questions that people want to ask. So I'm going to throw it open now to anybody who's got a question or a comment to make.
Thank you you very much for a wonderful talk. When are you writing the book?
No, be too scurrilous. The trouble is, I give talks of my life behind Mars, and I have to be very careful because it's always locally round here, and you must realise that there are relatives of people who live in Newton who may be listening to the talk.
You're live now. Yeah.
You know, you just have to be very careful. There was one occasion in a pub when I just have to tell you, women, when we first went there, ladies never came in the pub. It was just men. They're mostly farm workers on the estates. The women only came in high days and holy days when there was some celebration, and then they would come with hats and gloves, very formal. It was very different. So, I forgot what I was saying.
They probably told you stories.
Yes. So, yes, life has changed dramatically,
Yeah.
completely out of all recognition of what it was.
I guess there was a lot more compartmentalisation, and lines are much more blurred now than they used to be.
Yes, they are. Yes, and people are much freer, actually, than they were. They were constrained by money to begin with. I mean, beers always cost money, alcohol, and it's a thing you don't need to spend if you want to live a life. It's not necessary to have alcohol. But if you go to a pub, you know you're going to spend money. And when we bought the pub, they were straitened times. People were tied to the land. They're tied with their cottages. The wages are very low. There was no money to spare. So it was a frugal existence.
And I guess coming to the pub was a luxury or a...
Yes, very much so. Yes. So, yes, no book.
No, not yet. No book. Any other questions? Okay.
David, good evening. It's John Haig here. Do you still write poetry?
Sorry?
Do you still write poetry? You used to do poetry.
Oh yes, no, well, unfortunately the man who organised it became ill. We used to have poetry readings in the pub. It was started years ago by an American student, a lady student came in, and she was a poetess. And she wrote poems about cacti. I mean, not the most fascinating subject I read, but somehow she made it funny. And so these poems are quite humorous about the various cacti she'd met. So, and from that, people quite liked it actually, I was amazed. And so we used to have, this man came from Cambridge and asked me if his poetry circle could come and read poems in the pub. And so in the summer we'd go into the garden, I'd lay chairs out in the garden, and we'd have a fruit cup or something, with alcohol of course, for them to drink, and then they'd read their poems, which I loved actually.
Yeah.
And we got about 30, 35 people would come and listen, and we get about probably 10 poets. And I made a stipulation, they had to read their own poems. There's no use reading Longfellow or something like that. Anyone can do that. But I wanted them to read their own poems, and that was very popular.
Good. Queen said artistically as well.
But it stopped when Robert took the pub. It coincided with the man who organised it having problems with his health, and that was the end of that, sadly. I don't rule it out for the future if somebody else takes it up.
It's good to hear. Other questions?
You spend a lot of your life with beer. I'd just like to hear your opinion of that. You know, it's got more expensive. Has it got better, worse over the years? I mean, it's...
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't quite catch that.
So how has beer changed during...
Oh, beer has changed dramatically, yes.
better
I
or
mean,
worse?
drinks in general have changed dramatically. When we bought the pub, we were just selling bitter, well, mild was a great drink, and bitter, and then bottled beers. The occasional whiskey, the occasional gin, no wine, of course. It wasn't until people travelled in the 70s and went to Spain, and they realised there were other drinks available than beer and cider. No, cider wasn't even there. And they used to come back and then ask for things like Dubonnet and bitter lemon, very simple. Cinzano, martinis, things like that. So we had to stock them. And then, of course, wine started to be introduced, and people would ask for wine. And now, of course, wine is a huge seller in the pub. As is gin. Gin has changed. There are all kinds of gins now. We only had 2 gins when I bought the place, Gordon's and Booth's. And that was it. Now you can get about 20 different types of gin. So, yes, it's always changing. Do you remember Baby Sham?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, Baby Sham was served in portions in a kind of saucer
Yeah.
glass with a cherry.
Yes.
It's a cherry that sold it, actually. There was a marketing ploy there.
But I also
And
remember
one mouthful
what
was
is
gone.
Red Barrel, right?
Yeah. You know, one mouthful, it was gone. It was the size of a tonic bottle, baby tonic bottle. And that was it. One sip, down, and that was it. But now it's sold. It's not that we sell it now. In half-pint mug. That tells you. Yes, quite a lot actually about drinking habits.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to elaborate on drinking habits, actually, but probably not for this evening.
Well, they have changed.
They have changed.
They've changed dramatically, yes. I mean, years ago it was just mild and old and bitter was one. They called it mother-in-law. Sorry to any mothers. So that was the main drink, you see. It was all beer.
Yes.
And then, I say, people went abroad, it changed, and people started branching out, and then ladies started coming in the pub, and that changed everything, because they wanted daintier drinks. They didn't want a pint. Though now it's gone round again, and women come in and order a pint. And women will come in on their own and order a pint of bitter. Quite normal. I mean, the first lady who came in our pub, we'd just done the alterations, and the saloon bar was looking a bit smush. And this lady came in, very smart, very kind of pulled in and pushed out, and ordered a gin and tonic. And when she left with a man. I shouldn't be telling you this one. So, and she came in about 3 times a week. And every time she came in on her own, and every time she left with a man. So my father said to me, "What do you think? What do you think about this woman?" So I said, "She's on the game." Oh, he said, "That's what I think." Anyway, the next time she came in, she sidled up to my father and said, "Well, Mr. Short," she said, "I rather like your bar here. And if it's all right with you, I'd like to come regularly, and I'll make it worth your while." So my father, being a very honourable man, said, "On your bike," or that word, and she was never seen again. Now, she did come, I have to say, from Harston. Sorry about that. I mean, she'd be dead by now.
Just as well. Okay, any other questions? We've got another question here, yes.
I was going to ask what originally brought women into the pub, but I think you might have just answered the question. Apart from being on the game.
Yeah.
To get wages from men.
Oh yes, yes. I mean, the men who came in when we first bought the place, they get their wages on a Friday, cash. And the women would be outside the pub, asking for the money from the men, and then giving them some back for the drinking money. But those days are gone. Probably the other way around now. So Yes, ladies, I mean now, it's quite normal for ladies to be in the pub, either accompanied or unaccompanied. And the unaccompanied ones don't leave with a man. But another thing I must tell you in the village, we had a lot of people lodging together. Widows would often have a lodger, a male lodger, and the term was always a lodger. They weren't living together because that wasn't done, so there'd be a lodger. And it's quite noticeable how things have changed in that respect, because now no one really cares who's living with whom, and they don't really mind. But in those days, it's very proper that you were meant to be observing the niceties of behaviour.
Terms mattered, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah, it's good. I think Roger's got a question, yes?
David,
Yeah.
how did you come to be master of the farriers?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Farriers, yes. Now, for those who don't know, I'm a member of the working company of Farriers, which is a livery company in the City of London. And it's always been, well, for as long as I remember, I wasn't aware of anything about the city or the livery companies of the city until we moved to London after the war and came to live with my grandmother. And my grandmother's father, my great-grandfather, was very active in the City of London. He'd been a sheriff of London, a member of 4 city companies, and was had been master of the farriers 3 times, and it was part of the family history that you belonged to the farriers. So my father joined, and eventually I joined in 1975, I think it was. Then I went on and just a normal member for about 10 years, and then I was asked to join the court, which is the ruling body of the farriers. They were founded in 1356, so quite an old company. And so, and they control the shoeing of horses in this country to this day. You can't become a farrier unless you take our exams. So I worked my way in the court and eventually became master, which means you're the head honcho for that company. And it's fascinating. I knew nothing about farrieing at all. I've since learned quite a lot. And you have to then chair various committees and the court itself, of course. So it's another learning curve and responsibility. You have an Act of Parliament empowered you to do this, so you have to carry out your duties fairly and efficiently. So that took up, or takes up quite a bit of my time. I'm still on the court and still involved. So yes, that's how I became, through family connections. I think it dates back to our family to 1865, when they first joined. So,
The farriers in medieval time, didn't they cut off the hooves of horses rather than shoe?
yes. They were founded in 1356 by the Mayor of London at the time, was so disgusted by the standard of farriery. Anyone in those days, you could set up a handle in the street and shoe horses. And horses were like the Rolls Royces of their time, at this time. And one bad nail can lame a horse for life. So he was so disgusted, he asked the leading 2 farriers in the city to form a kind of livery. It wasn't called a livery, it was called there's a word for it anyway, like a friendship. A guild, there's another word as well beside guild, and they all came together and formed this company, and then we got a royal charter, and away you go. You get the royal charter because the king wants money usually, and you have to pay to get a royal charter. That's how it is. So,
Thank
yes.
you.
been fascinating.
Yes, well, thank you for bringing up that, Roger. That was a part we didn't get time to cover. Are there any other questions?
Sorry, I couldn't. Oh, the goose. Oh, dear Belinda. Yes. Well, Belinda, like everything else, came into my life out of the blue. She lived with her 2 siblings on the kind of farm across the way from us, belonging to Hull. And one day there was some work done on the farm which cut her off unwillingly. I don't think they realised they'd done this, from her feeding ground. And so she upped, and the other thing was the fox got her 2 siblings. So she was left alone. And they're a bit of a flock bird, and they like company. So she came over to the car park, and my father made the fatal mistake of giving it some bread. And it wouldn't leave after that. So he put bread and water down, and she lived on the car park. And actually she was very good, because anyone trying to rob the pub, and we've been burgled 7 times, by the way, they had to face Belinda. And she was quite ferocious. And she used to, she hated women actually. She loved men, hated women. She was a handbag, I think. And so she used to reside by my father's car. And she patrolled the car park. And then when customers would come and take their food outside and eat, she would go straight for the sandwiches. They were petrified of her. And they'd come in and she'd go up to them and down would go her beak into the sandwiches and take the sandwich out. And then shriek out and come round and order some more. And she got fan mail from America. She was called Belinda. I think my mother called her that. Belinda Blue Eyes. She had beautiful blue eyes. And she loved me, and she used to come every morning and knock on the back door for feeding. And you'd hear this bang, 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 bang on the wooden door. And I'd open it and she'd be there. Her wings would be up. And then she'd waddle towards me and try and stand on my shoes. A bit unnerving, really. So, and then what another of her kind of funny things was she'd go out onto the middle of the road, very busy road, and not allow anything past. She got really annoyed at cars daring to go past her. And so she'd go and sit on the white line in the middle. And as soon as a lorry or something came, she'd line up and put her wings up like this and stop them all. They were petrified. Luckily she wasn't run over. And so I could hear it quite early in the morning. If the traffic wasn't moving, I'd say to Judith, better go down, it's Belinda again. And she'd be on that road, and I had to go in my pyjamas and pick her up and take her onto the car park, where she belonged. But she was really a lovely thing. She lived to a good age, 25 I think she was. And she died in my arms. It was very traumatic. She got a growth, I think, and she couldn't eat. And we force-fed her for a while, but it didn't work. I took her to the veterinary school in Cambridge, and they'd never seen a goose that old, because most of them are eaten before they get to that stage. So she had a good life. She had a good life, and she's now stuffed. And there's a story behind that, because when she died, I stuck her in a plastic bag. I had an idea to have her stuffed. And so I phoned up, the only person I could find on the Yellow Pages was somewhere on the coast in Suffolk. And so I said to him, what do I do? He said, put her in a plastic bag and put her in the freezer. And then bring it to me when I've got more time to stuff her. So I did. I went to our freezer and put the plastic bag at the very bottom and put everything else on top. And Julie never knew. So, like, it never happened, of course. And so, and then when he phoned up and said, yes, I'm ready to receive her. And so I said, right. So I said to Julie, well, go out for a day, I'm going to take you out for a ride and we'll have lunch, you see. So took her to this, I think it's what's it called? I can't remember. It's on the Blackwater or somewhere anyway, in Essex. And so I put her in a boot in this plastic bag and drove Judith there. And it wasn't until we got right outside the place that she said, this is a very funny restaurant. I said, got something before we eat, I want to do this. So and she couldn't stop laughing then. Anyway, when it came time to stuff, he told me, he said, by the way, that was a gander, not a goose. So, yes. I wonder why she laid no eggs.
Fascinating story, and I think, you know, thank you very much for all of your stories and for taking us through your very interesting, varied and very unexpected life, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you.